Alright guys, welcome back to episode 13 now of the League Express podcast. My name's Jake KEARNAN, and joining me as always is the editor of League Express, MARTYN Sadler. And Martin, so we've got another special guest with us. Can you introduce him?
We have, unlucky number 13, but lucky for Jason Costigan. Costo, as we know him by, our Australian friend who was, for a couple of years, the media manager at Bradford Bulls in the mid-1990s, just when Super League started. But since then, Costo, you've had a hell of a varied career, but one of your key roles is that you've been a TV commentator for Sky in down under, particularly in New Zealand. You used to call a lot of Warriors home matches, didn't you?
Yeah, I did. Hi, Martin and Jake, and great memories when we think back to that time back in the 2000s. And a real privilege it was to be the voice of the Warriors, the voice of the Kiwis at the international level, culminating in that famous World Cup success with the Kiwis back in 2008. And so, look, it's great to be here back in the UK, and we worked with some terrific people back then, a great team, and fond memories indeed.
You worked with the great Peter Deakin, didn't you? One of the incredible brains that were behind Super League when it first started, and he was, I think, the guy who was responsible for making Bradford such an incredible success in those early years.
Well, Martin, Jake, just for the benefit of our younger audience, for a lot of people, in the early days of Super League, there was no grand final. Maurice Lindsay brought in the grand final.
1998,
yeah, that's right. Some things were not as they are today, obviously, but back in the early days, Peter Deakin was the man, as you allude to. He revolutionised the game in Britain.
Yeah.
Bullman, Bullmania, Bull whatever. It's a G-rated program, I know, but he basically turned it on its head and said this is the way forward. He was the greatest marketing genius, in my opinion, for either code of rugby in the Northern Hemisphere. And unfortunately, of course, he's sadly no longer with us, and I'm sure swapping notes with Mo Lindsay, thinking, what's going on with our game?
Yeah, I'll tell you a little story about Peter Deakin that you won't find too surprising, but which illustrates the sort of a guy he was. Back in the 1980s, in 1984, we set up a competition for sixth form rugby league schools, and then we set up a competition for private independent schools to play rugby league, which everybody said was an impossible thing to do. Private schools in this country have always played rugby union, and everybody said, you're wasting your time trying to get private schools playing. Peter Deakin said, leave it to me. And Peter went round all the private schools in the north of England. I remember one school in particular, Macclesfield School, which was a very well-known private school in Cheshire, noted for its rugby union setup. And the guy who ran the rugby union school, there at that school said, well, you can come and see me if you want, Peter, but you're wasting your time. There's absolutely no way I'll play this damn game, rugby league. Peter went to see him. The next thing, this guy became the secretary of the association, and entered his team in this competition and did very well in it. Peter could persuade anybody of anything.
Well, he
just got this remarkable ability.
For sure.
He could, talk about selling coal to Newcastle.
Or ice to the Eskimos. He was a genius,
Absolutely.
as I say, and rugby league is poor in this country for his passing. And
it is.
And I think a lot of people should go back and look at some of the things he was doing and that the game was doing very well.
Yeah.
And people from Australia, Jake, New Zealand, were watching the UK with great interest. Everyone followed a team.
Yeah.
You used to be able to attract the best players. There was parity in terms of salary cap, or much better than what we have today. And for me, I want to see the British game rejuvenated. And I went to Old Trafford on Saturday night, hoping that the French team would win. Obviously, it wasn't to be with the Dragons. We'll come to that later. But there's so much potential for European Rugby League.
There is.
And to expand the game, nationalise the game. And that's why I'm so excited, Martin, Jake, to see the London Broncos back in the top flight.
Yes, I think that's a view shared by a lot of people, although I think a few people were two-minded about that game in France on Sunday, because a lot of people would have liked to see Toulouse back in as well. But I think it's important for London to be in the Super League, and hopefully they'll do well next year. It's a big ask, though.
And it was a nice come-from-behind win for London. They didn't have it easy in the first half there.
Amazing.
But yeah, we will get into that a little bit later. But just to start off with, Costo, could you tell us how you got into calling rugby league and where it all started for you, mate?
Well, the short answer is I was 16 years of age, and I was at high school, and I was the publicity officer, if you like, for our local competition, our local league in North Queensland. So a long way from our state capital. It would take 12 hours in a car to get to Brisbane. This is in the tropics down under.
Where were you, Mount Isa or somewhere?
No, I was in Mackay, but I would go to Mount Isa later with Uncle Rupert. I say that in reference to Rupert Murdoch with News Corp, covering rugby league in Mount Isa, the old stomping ground of the Tongan coach Christian Wolf, obviously.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, and Kelkadoon country for our Indigenous friends and brothers. But I was 16 and I was popping up on the TV every Friday night for what became part of the Seven Network, calling local rugby league. So Dane Gagai, for example, his father, I would call him on any given Sunday, and it started, as I said, 35 years ago, in fact. And then by the age of, 21, I called Great Britain touring down under. I called Fiji the following year. And then I think at 23, I became the original voice from a television point of view with the Cowboys when we joined what was called the Winfield Cup. And then in the UK calling Super League 2 years later. So, clearly I love it, and it's in the blood, and it didn't happen yesterday.
And it's rugby league heartland up in Mackay there, produced a lot of talent. You touched on there, Dane Gagai, his father, obviously Benny Barber, a great Mackay player. I grew up in Gladstone, attended St Brendan's College, so we come up and played a few games up in Mackay, and there's always a great turnout up there for rugby league fans.
Yeah, and I know your old stomping ground because I used to read the news in your part of the world and come down to Marley Brown Oval covering the rugby league. In fact, where Jake's home ground for rugby league in the port city of Gladstone, that's where I called Fiji on their pioneering tour. Fiji Rugby League is only 31 years old, Martin. And I was at the 30th anniversary dinner in Suva last year in the capital. I've been to Fiji calling rugby league there 3 times in the last year or so. But I fondly remember the Fijians coming to Gladstone on a pioneering tour of Australia, their first ever, after the likes of Noah Nandrugo said, "See you later, kick and clap."
Yeah,
we want some money and we want some respect, backed by the current Prime Minister of Fiji, Major General Rambuka, Prime Minister Rambuka, and of course that tour, which was funded by the Queensland Rugby League, Martin, they went on up to Port Moresby to play the Kumals, their first test match between the two Melanesian brothers, Fiji and PNG.
And they've come a long way since then.
They sure have.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, why don't we get into what we saw over the weekend as well? Obviously, the Wigan Warriors defeated the Catalans Dragons in a tightly contested battle. There wasn't many points scored, I will say. What was your reaction, Martin?
Well, it was the first time that any side in a grand final has failed to score a try, and that was the Catalans, of course. 10-2 was the result, and if we're really honest about it, the Catalans never looked like scoring a try. I said to Steve McNamara after the game that their last play kicking game was absolutely non-existent, and he agreed, actually. But did say, it had been good earlier in the season for them, and for some reason it had gone wrong on the night. But they didn't look prepared to me for that. Knowing when you're in a grand final, everything has to go right, hasn't it? You've got to have all facets of your game really attuned.
Well, man, you've got to put yourself in a position to win the game. And I think, Jay, coming back to, I went there with great anticipation. I was so excited to go to Old Trafford, not my first time to the Theatre of Dreams. And I thought this could be the dream come true, the proverbial fairy tale for the Dragons. And when it came to last play options, I thought, why aren't they mixing this up? Where's their variety? Where's Mitchell Pearce? And I got to say, and I'm going to be the elephant in the room here, I'm a big fan of Mitchell Pearce, and I just think it was so sad that he got hooked late in the game after shooting blanks for most of the game.
Yeah. And he did pull off one fantastic tackle, though, didn't he?
Yeah, but have a look at who scored for the opposition and what happened there. So you take the good with the bad, but when you're playing in the halves, and you're supposed to be the architect, the playmakers, where was the threading of the needle to put the back three under pressure? Like Miski, for example, he must have thought, how good's this? No wonder he's the king of Beirut right now.
Yeah.
No,
absolutely right. Yeah, fifth tackle options very poor. It seemed like heading into half time, it was still quite tightly contested. Obviously, Dragons were still in it. How big of an impact did the two sin binnings have?
Well, the second one, clearly, because Wigan scored when Tom Davis was off the field, didn't they? So, that clearly was significant. And we might want to talk about something here, actually, because I noticed there's a bit of a move in Australia to change the rule on sin binning. Have you seen that?
Well, I have seen it, and I'm going to jump in right here, Martin, because Gavin Badger's come out in the last, I think, couple of hours and basically poo-pooed the idea, or at least raised massive questions here about how coaches are going to try and manipulate the rules and manipulate the changing.
Well, they always do, don't they?
Well, they do, and this is not a new concept. It's been going on since the game, I dare say, was formed in 1895, and looking at the rules and think, I know how to fix that. We can win, and we'll do it this way. Look, I think it's fraught with danger, and I think...
The suggestion was, by the way, just in case people... that sin bin players or even sent-off players could be replaced... while they were off the field.
That's rubbish. Rubbish. If you've done the wrong thing, if it's a professional foul, you need to be at a disadvantage. What happened in the grand final, that's how it happened. Look, Catalan, they had to soak up a lot of pressure. Their tackle count went up. They stressed the defence. I'm surprised they didn't leak more points. I thought they did awfully well.
Well, they did well when Kieran was off the field, didn't they?
For sure. They scrambled unbelievably, and I think it was frustrating for Wigan. But this idea of 5-minute sin binning in the NRL, stop tinkering with the rules. I think a lot of the punters...
Or if you're going to tinker with them, tinker with some better rules than that. It's unnecessary, I think, isn't it?
Well, it is. And I've got to say, during the grand final, there's a lot of plaudits coming Liam Moore's way. But I tell you what, this tackle count nullify, 6 to go effectively. There was a number of occasions there where the Dragons were crying out for a penalty. They needed a piggyback down the field, but they never got it. So the rules were enforced as they were. But if you're Steve...
You mean you would have given more 6 agains?
Well, no, if I'm Steve McNamara, I want the rule in place and to be policed so that if they're holding down, and Wigan were, it happened, I think, how many times? They deserve to get a penalty to go downtown rather than 6 to go right there. Because if you're Wigan, you think, how good's this?
Yeah, that's right. And we're seeing a lot in the NRL as well, teams using the 6 again to their advantage, especially when they're defending their own try line to reset the line. Now, what I will say is, we saw how the NRL Grand Final was reffed. Obviously, Adam G got a huge rap for just letting the game play out. Unfortunately, we didn't really see that in the Super League. The 2 yellow cards obviously made a huge difference. But would you have liked to have seen a bit of leniency in terms of send-offs and that sort of thing over the weekend?
I'm not sure about that. I think both yellow cards were justified personally, and I don't think. And the interesting thing is that I don't think the Catalans have since moaned about those.
No. I think they took their medicine well.
Yeah.
And I concur with Martin here.
Yeah.
I think the referee in that situation did the right thing. They had to sit down for a few minutes. They had to be sat down.
Yeah, both were fairly clear cut, I thought, and the funny thing was that the Catalans, when Tom Davis was sin-binned, the Catalans looked as though they were going to survive that 10 minutes, but actually Marshall scored just before his 10 minutes was up, and of course they scored down his wing, didn't they? So they took advantage of his absence, and that was the game as far as I was concerned. Because once they scored, they were never going to come back.
I'm not so sure about that. I had confidence, and I was optimistic. I was of the view that the halves for the Dragons could conjure something up and put some pressure on the back three when they came down that end of the field, and it just didn't happen. They came up with dud kicks, and I don't know whether the message didn't go out from McNamara or they just didn't listen. And if they didn't listen, they're as thick as bricks.
The funny thing was that the half-time adjustment that Wigan made was far smarter than the half-time adjustment, if any, that the Catalans made. Because, in the press conference afterwards, Matty Peet made it very clear that they'd been really worried about Tyrone May. I thought Tyrone May was by far the most threatening Catalans player in the first half, but you didn't see much of him afterwards, and I think Wigan just pleased him a hell of a lot better in that second half. But you mentioned Mitchell Pearce being substituted fairly late on. I was quite surprised that they didn't bring Arthur Morgan earlier. Well, to be honest, because
the game needed Arthur.
He's a guy who can break through. He's really nimble on his feet, and if anybody was ever going to threaten Wigan, especially a tiring Wigan side, because don't forget Wigan were a man down for most of the game because Ethan Havard, they'd selected him knowing he had a hamstring problem. and it didn't work, did it? He went off after about 16 minutes and never came back on again. So,
they're playing under handicap.
That's right, they're playing at a handicap, and so therefore was doing a lot of minutes. And if they'd brought, Morgan a bit earlier, I think, you never know, do you? Because it's always easy to be wise in hindsight, but I think that they might have, had a breakthrough with him on the field. But, we'll never know that now, will we, of course?
The other half-time adjustment I really liked from Matty Pete was he sent a lot more traffic down Catalans' right edge. They kept attacking and they were relentless, weren't they?
And Pearce by then had a gutful. He saw more traffic than the M1.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it showed because he is an adequate defender. It's not his forte. He's not paid to be a defensive specialist, but you do have to make those one-on-one stops. But he had players coming at him 100 mile an hour, and if I was Steve McNamara, I probably would have been tempted to bring him over the other side to try and relieve him of what was a taxing commission in defence. Because every time the lethal left of Wigan attacked, they would direct so much traffic at Pearce.
They did.
And in the end, perhaps he was gassed, but he was certainly down in terms of the variety of the kicking game and mixing it up. Because if you're the back three for Wigan, you thought, how good's this?
Yeah. Interestingly enough, Jake Wardle, who won the Harry Sunderland Trophy as man of the match, is not in the England squad.
Can you believe it, Mark?
It's been announced today. I find that amazing, actually.
Crazy, isn't it?
Yeah.
He was,
unless he's injured or something. I've only seen the squad and I've not seen any reference to Jake Wardle.
There's already
people. May have
people
pulled up with an injury.
Well, there's already people in cyberspace venting their spleen as to why he hasn't been picked, and he's not the only omission. I know there's injuries there with Farnworth and whatnot, but you have to wonder. Well, he was fit enough to play in the grand final. But he's not fit enough to play.
Well, the interesting thing is
against Tonga.
Just looking at his 24-man squad, he's picked two centres, Harry Newman and Toby King, both of whom play on the right side. So he's not actually picked. He's not picked Wardle, and he's not picked Mark Percival from St Helens.
Well, Percival,
both of them left side players.
Well, the Percival fan club, again, before coming in to do this podcast, they're blowing up Deluxe. They're not happy.
No,
and so look, this was always going to be the case. It's a subjective field picking representative teams, and all the pressure's on England here. Don't forget, this is a pioneering tour. We all know it. It's a special moment for Tonga. I came over with some of the players. In fact, one of the fathers of the players, very excited. They understand the significance of this tour.
I bet they do.
It's been a long time coming. And don't forget, they were very disappointed, needless to say, with what happened in the World Cup. So they've got a point to prove, and they'll be looking to go through England like a bad curry.
Yes, I know. And England have had very little time to prepare.
Yeah.
I mean, the guys who played in the grand final, of whom there were several in this England squad, they've had no time, have they?
Well, that's right. But then on the flip side, England playing at home, English conditions. There's a question mark there with Tonga whether they can make the adjustment. There's no warm-up game. If I was Tonga, I would have dearly liked to play Cumbria or a RFL Chairman's 13 or Chairs 13 or something to get the rust out. Yeah. But that's not happening. They're going to go straight into St Helens on this weekend, and I tell you what, there's a lot of people looking forward to this.
I just hope the RFL are selling all the tickets.
Well, we hope so. And I got to say, very interestingly, in Leeds City Centre, there's the promotional literature on the signage in the streets. I think it was where I was in Albion Street or somewhere like that. And there's Jason Tamalolo.
Oh, really?
Right. So he's being used to promote the Test series, despite the fact
that he's not coming.
He's not playing, but they've still got some great players, but rather odd to see Tamalolo there, and of course he's sitting back home.
Yes, of course.
Also, I wanted to ask you, mate, given that the Tongan players have had such a lengthy break off, do you think that helps or hurts them going into this series against England?
Well, I think players want to have a break, depending on where you were. If you played in the grand final, that wasn't that long ago, but if your season finished in early September, well, you've had a good break and you're raring to go. So, look, it is what it is. It's the international window, and I'm a big fan of the international game. I know you guys are big fans of the international game, and we need to show more respect for the international game. And, look, I'm sure we can talk about the Pacific Championships in a moment, but it's so much to look forward to, players getting the chance to represent their culture and their family, and there's something beautiful about that.
But we will find out, won't we, on Saturday, whether, a 6-week break is better preparation for a test match than a 1 week break, because that's going to be the contrast between the two teams. So if England win, we can say that a 1 week break doesn't damage you too much. But if the Tongans win, it'll be the reverse, won't it? I suppose.
Well, all the pressure's on England. Let's not sugarcoat this.
And on Sean Wayne after England's disappointing performance in last year's World Cup, which obviously England were meant to win on home soil. You've got to say Sean's under the cosh, really, and I hope he comes through, because we're all wanting. And of course, you two are Aussies, but certainly those of us who are English all want England to do well.
Well, I want England to realise its potential in International Rugby League. I didn't want to come on the podcast and lament about 50 years of mediocrity, right? But not that I'm counting. But nothing would please me more than to see the British game go up domestically. In terms of the quality of players, the investment in kids and youth and academy systems, and the women's game, which is a great growth area for our sport.
Absolutely, yeah.
But not only that, to see England winning trophies. I had the privilege of calling Great Britain and England back when Steve was the national coach and others. It's just a special thing to see the players lining up for the national anthems.
It is.
Unless you're a kangaroo, depending on who you are. And singing the national anthem.
We might want to talk about that.
Happy to talk about that, because some people show national pride different to others, needless to say.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the other interesting picks, George Williams, he's been selected. Obviously, he's going to face
he's got an appeal tonight. There's a second appeal tonight.
Well, a second frivolous appeal.
Oh, it might be increased to 3 games. Who knows?
Yeah.
But
he's got man. Come on, he's got more front than Marks and Spencer.
Yeah, well, but only we would ban our own international captain for the first 2 matches of a Test series.
Well, I can tell you, the
Aussies would never do that.
No, a kangaroo court would never allow it.
No,
absolutely not. No, that's right. But as touched on before, we did have some international games go down in Australia over the weekend. Obviously, Australia got a pretty convincing win over Samoa. What was your reaction to that game, Costo?
Look, I thought Samoa could beat them. I thought Samoa got to the final of the World Cup. We know that. And I think Australia is not as strong as we used to be. And we had players missing. I'm not saying that Daly Cherry Evans is third, fourth choice, whatever. He's a first-class player, and Cleary's obviously gone past him, but he wasn't available to play. But having said that,
Cherry Evans always plays well for Australia.
He does,
and Queensland, to be honest.
He does, but Samoa obviously had players missing as well. So keep personnel missing. Australia's got greater depth, but look. Samoa were disappointing. I've got to say that in the opening minutes of the game, clearly they were starstruck. They were slow out of the blocks. They'll be better for that. Changing the coaching stuff, let's not forget that. The days of the Matt Parrish era is over. And look, they did well to get to the final in England last year. I expected more in the game in Townsville, but Australia showing its class and the depth coming to the fore.
But Samoa have unearthed a really new star of the future.
Fa'alongo is obviously got enormous potential. There's a lot of people jumping on the bandwagon, and rightly so.
A young Melbourne Storm player, but
no, he was a big talking point to come out of the game, and I'm sure. People are taking note of his progress and his rapid rise in rugby league.
In fact, his incredible showing gives problems for Melbourne Storm, doesn't it? Because he's a fullback. They've got Nick Meaney, who's deputised for Pappenhausen extremely well. Pappenhausen, who came back and then was injured straight away again, but he's still a brilliant player when he recovers. From that ankle injury. So how will they fit all those guys in, particularly in a salary cap sport? That's going to be a problem for them, isn't it?
It's $1 million question.
There'll be 16 other NRL clubs looking to pounce, I think, to sign up that young man.
I'll read a few of his stats from the weekend. So we had 18 runs, 170 metres running, 75 post-contact metres, 1 line break assist, and 11 tackle breaks. Now, if that's not one of the most impressive international debuts for a young fullback.
Absolutely.
Given he's only played 1 NRL game, that's against an Australian Kangaroos side, to have that performance. And a brilliant try disallowed. It would have been a try of the tournament had he have been given that chip and chase, Billy Slater-like. So, it was a great performance. But I'll tell you what,
it's one of those performances you love to see. I mean, one of the great things about rugby league, I've been involved for donkey's years. but it's always a great thing to see a young player coming through.
Yeah.
The first time I saw Billy Slater, for example, we mentioned him. What a great young player he was, and I can go back to loads of players in this country. The first time. I saw James Roby, for example, who just was great right from the very start, and so many others. Sam Tompkins is another one who, you saw him as a young kid, as a teenager,
and you knew he was going to be a star. Something special about him.
Yeah, it was going to be a star. So I think he scored 6 or 7 tries on his debut in the Challenge Cup against Whitehaven for Wigan back in 2006 or 7, I think it was. And you know that you're watching a star in the making, and that's always a thrilling thing as far as I'm concerned.
Well, I think the big thing about Whātālongo is that there's a lot of kids, particularly the Polynesian community in Western Sydney, for example, I think of straight away, and in southeast Queensland. They may not follow his club, but when they come and play, he will bring players through the turnstiles. And,
well, if the Bulldogs signed him, that'd be a great signing, wouldn't it?
Well, they're gonna need more than him, but
they are.
They are. And but for putting that aside, there's a select number of players that can only you point the finger at, saying that player brings people, they bring fans through the turnstiles.
Exactly.
People will want to see them, press the button, turn the telly on, because I want to see him play. If he's playing in a town near me, I want to go and watch him play. And so an excitement machine and a good news story for rugby league.
Absolutely, yeah.
He's got shades of early Anthony Milford, when he was in his Canberra Raiders fullback days. He's got a similar build. He's quite stocky, for a fullback, but what an excitement machine. I thought also Australia's middles, obviously Tino and Payne Haas, how can you compete with those two in the middle? They really set the platform.
Absolutely brilliant, yeah. And either of them could have played for Samoa, couldn't they? I think they're both qualified to play for Samoa. Probably a good job for everybody else that they're not doing.
Yeah, that's right.
Haas is world class, and and I've got to say, without Tino, where would the Gold Coast be? If you look at the ladder, look where the Gold Coast were earlier in the season. There's not too many players that can hold their head high at the Gold Coast, but Tino has just been enormous for them, and on the club scene. A few of those players want to have a good look at themselves and think, hang on, why can't we be like our captain?
Absolutely, yeah.
That's right. We also had the PNG Commonwealth 46 defeat Cook Islands 10.
Well, that came as no surprise. Carmichael Hunt making his Test coaching debut, following in the footsteps of my good friend and former colleague from Sky TV, Tony Iro. Tony's still involved with the team from an operations point of view. But, special...
And a good result for Justin Holbrook, though.
Well, it was, but
PNG coach.
But very much expected.
Oh, yeah.
They're playing in Port Moresby at the Sandhurst Stadium. A much more rounded side, raging hot favourites. Will Fiji trouble them in that tournament? Well, I'm not convinced. I know that Waikata Varata, I've caught up with Wise in the last 6 months or so in Fiji. Very excited to be coming back to Fiji, on the ground in Fiji, preparing Fiji, developing the game in Fiji. But PNG definitely favourites to win that tournament, and that scoreline came as no surprise whatsoever.
No, that's right. Just a quick one, though. We mentioned earlier the controversy surrounding singing the national anthem for Australia. Four players clearly didn't sing it, and that did cause some controversy in the news media in Australia afterwards.
Well, if you're a player and you're not going to sing, that's fine, but don't expect the media just to... forget about it, or don't even pick up on it. The fans, they think the fans are mugs that aren't going to see. Go and have a look at our other national sporting teams, Jake, our other national teams, whether it be the Kookaburras or the Hockeyroos in hockey, or the Dolphins in swimming, or the Wallabies or the Socceroos or the Matildas. Go and have a look at the other teams and look at the players lining up, and is there discussion about their players and representatives singing or not singing the national anthem? No, it seems to be peculiar to rugby league. Isn't that interesting?
Max Krilich, of course, an ex-Australian captain, was quoted as saying that if you're not going to sing the national anthem, you shouldn't be selected.
Yes.
Well, I think that's a crazy thought, absolutely, because... Australia, whatever you think of it, and you two are both Australian, it's a country of free expression, free speech, isn't it? And if you want to stay silent when you're singing a national anthem, that's your right to do so. You may make yourself unpopular by doing it, and you've got to take the consequences, as you say. But to actually lay down a dictate that you've got to sing it, these guys all have their own motivations for not singing, I think, and you've got to respect that, as far as I'm concerned.
Well, if I had the chance to wear the green and gold, I'm not a choir boy, but I'd be singing.
Oh, and
there you go. Not sure about you, Jake.
Yeah. I'd be singing our own national anthem. Yes, of course.
Well, that's the thing. It's like, first of all, I'll say rugby league players always seem to be more harshly scrutinised than any other athlete in Australia, and we can't walk a mile in their shoes, so we don't really understand, what it is they're protesting. We can't really speak for them, but, we can only speak for ourselves. And if that's how they want to express how they feel, as you said, they're well within their right to do that.
Absolutely.
But yeah, it's just a bit disappointing that sort of becomes the media focus when we're trying to grow the game internationally.
Well, if you don't want it to be the media focus, sing the national anthem.
Yeah.
Fair enough. All right, now we also had some great women's games take place down south. Australia 16 defeated the Kiwis 10. That was a pretty tightly contested battle as well.
A lot tighter than I thought it would be, actually, I've got to say. And the Kiwis playing when the Warriors don't have a team in the NRLW, so
not anymore.
No. Well, not they did, but they will do again, won't they? I think.
Well, we hope so.
From 25.
We hope so because, as I said a moment ago, it's a huge growth area for the game, and I acknowledge it's not just confined to the Southern Hemisphere. Great opportunities for young ladies and girls playing our game, and how that's changed in recent years, and it warms my heart to see that. So opportunities for these players, and the scoreline in that game did surprise me, but I got to say those two teams head and shoulders above the rest of the world.
There's no doubt about it.
So England can crow about who they beat, but until you can meet New Zealand or Australia there, well, zip it and go back to work.
Yeah.
We also had the Samoan women's side, 26 defeated Fiji 12. It's not a blowout, but a convincing win for Samoa. So it'd be great to keep an eye on the women's tournament going forward.
Well, I've got no doubt that we've seen the growth of the South Pacific nations in recent years in men's rugby league, and I'm sure we're going to see a similar thing in women's rugby league. I mean, you know more about this than I do, Costo, but the women of Samoa and Tonga and Fiji and so on, if they club together, they could be pretty formidable, couldn't they?
Well, I think so, but a lot of it in terms of the pathways, we touched on just a moment ago about the Warriors. They were in the NRLW. They're no longer in the NRLW. Will they come back? Well, time will tell. Should every club have an NRLW team? Well, my personal view is yes, and that opens up a bigger production line, does it not?
It does, but also you've got to bear in mind that the AFL in Australia, every AFL club has a women's team as well.
Yep.
But a lot of people say that's extended. There's not enough talent there for 18 teams, and I think
you're talking about 18 teams for rugby league.
For the AFL, and it's sort of. With the NRLW only having 10 teams, people seem to suggest that that's made it a better competition than the AFL equivalent. I don't know whether you agree with that.
Well,
you maybe don't watch much AFLW as of course I don't.
I spent a bit of time. I have lived in Victoria, and I have been to the MCG when Collingwood's played Carlton, and not quite my cup of tea. But the AFL do a lot of things very well that rugby league can learn from. I'll leave it at that. And that includes growing the game, national footprint, working with government. They do a lot of things very well. Particularly in the Indigenous communities. I can tell you, both of you and our audience, in places like Cape York, which is very remote, that's the pointy bit of Queensland or Australia pointing up towards Papua New Guinea, AFL have got people on the ground, and they've had them there for years and years, looking for the next superstar, competing with rugby league in rugby league's heartland. And they can do it because they've got the moolah. How have they got the money? Broadcast revenue.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. No, absolutely right. And I think speaking from like a grassroots level for the women's game, we're seeing a lot more participants. A lot of girls through high school now are eligible for rep teams that back in the day didn't exist. We're also seeing in the NRLW at the moment the amount of 17, 18-year-olds coming through and debuting and tearing the house down with their play. So
and it's really entertaining, the NRLW. That's the whole point, really. It's all these things are true, but the ultimate point is it's entertaining to watch.
It is.
And some of these young women are terrific athletes, actually.
Yeah, and I've heard a few people make this comparison, but I liken the NRLW to how our game used to be played before the wrestle was brought in. There was a lot of there's a lot of big hits and girls just running with no fear.
Well, the game's got purity.
Yeah, that's right.
And that is so refreshing to watch. The women's game has got a high degree of innocence, if I can put it in another way.
Yeah.
But I take Martin's point before about the talent pool, just for the benefit of our audience. We've all heard of Wagga Wagga or the Riverina and players like Steve Mortimer and Peter Sterling, and there's a whole production line that have come out of southern New South Wales. That's halfway, if you like, between the big cities of Sydney and Melbourne. There is no women's tackle competition in that part of the world. So there's some holes in the system that Peter V'landys and the authorities have got to look at. If they want to grow the game, there's still issues in the grassroots. It'd be like saying, Martin, there's no women's rugby league in Cumbria.
Yes, of course. Yeah.
So that's a big heartland. So if you've got holes like that, holes like a tea strainer, you need to do something
about
it.
the AFL's done some great work in Riverina, hasn't it?
Well, they have, and they've annexed that, even though places like Wagga Wagga are in New South Wales. Culturally, it's effectively the border. It's where the two worlds collide.
The Barassi line.
It is the Barassi line. It's a great reference there that Martin's used. The Barassi line, obviously in reference to the competing interest between AFL and rugby league. It's very hard sometimes to explain to people in the Northern Hemisphere. In Australia, the two big sports that go head-to-head are in fact AFL, Aussie Rules Football, and Rugby League. Rugby Union, well, a distant third at best.
And even more distant now. They did so badly in the World Cup.
Well, Martin, and Jake can pick me up on this, you could go into Newcastle, Wollongong, Bathurst, I think out to Parramatta and Sydney's western suburbs, Wagga Wagga, Cairns, and you could ask people, or your hometown, Gladstone, you could say to people, can you name someone who plays for the Wallabies?
Yeah.
Martin, people struggle. They've got no idea. The most famous person with the Wallabies is the human headline himself, Eddie Jones. After that, they've got nothing.
That's right. Yeah, it's interesting comparing the grassroots between the two rugby codes, and in Queensland it's almost non-existent. You know, we do have some local club sides, but anywhere north of Sunshine Coast. It's rugby league heartland,
well, it falls off a precipice. It really does, and I don't want to sink the boot in, but I will, because our game, as you know, Martin knows, we're not here to give a history lesson, but we all know what happened in France during World War II. Rugby league has been the professional code. We've given opportunity for people, regardless of the colour of their skin, where they come from, the language that they speak. Our story is a great story. It's a global story.
Of course.
And I think what we don't do as a game, we don't talk about that beautiful story enough.
We don't exploit it, do we, as a code? I mean, we don't. Our game has been the most inclusive game of any major sport.
Well, Martin,
in my opinion.
last year, I lost count, Jake. I lost count how many times the governing body or the authorities with the World Cup kept talking about the inclusiveness, almost as if it was brand new, that concept.
I know.
Martin was right.
It's been there forever.
Forever and a day. And we look at the multicultural aspect of our game. It happened before the Polynesian tsunami in the early 2000s, which I had the privilege of seeing with that wonderful wave of players, Ali Lauatiti, Iafeka Paliasina, Clinton Torpy, Henry Fa'afili, David Fa'alongo, the Hair Bears from Penrith. I could go on and on. The Europeans, the sons of immigrants from Europe. I'm one of those kids. I didn't play, obviously, to that level, but it's a great story. It's a beautiful story. And so when we have multicultural round, it's almost as if it's important for one weekend and we forget it. A bit like the Indigenous round.
Absolutely.
And so it's a story that I think that our custodians of the game should keep promoting in terms of reminding government, broadcasters, stakeholders, key stakeholders about the diversity of our game and how inclusive we are.
Yeah.
What do you think is something that the Super League can learn from with what V'landys is doing in the NRL at the moment? Like, is there anything they can take from the NRL to grow the game up here in the north?
Well, they've got to get expansion right. I'm gonna go straight into
Okay.
that, Martin.
No, that's fine.
Right, I'm not saying Volandis has got it right, because if you read some of the stuff in the past, for example, Peter Volandis thought Perth was on Mars. Now, I'm stretching the truth a bit there, but he wasn't a big fan of bringing Western Australia back into an expanded NRL competition. I think he might have softened that stance. We've seen a number of games and clubs being played in the West. We do need to expand the game. The British game, if the game is so good, and we all know that the game is unbelievable.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful game. It's an exciting game. We're all passionate about it. Why don't we have key markets in the United Kingdom, or at least in England, stitched up?
Well, we've just lost one, and that's Newcastle.
And of course,
which is incredible.
I'm glad you brought that up. All the investment with Magic Weekend in the UK, all the investment with the World Cup last year and other events, and Newcastle has just gone to the bottom of the ocean. And no one's saying that they've folded. They've left the scene for the time being. If you read the press release, we'll read what you like into it, but it's embarrassing for our game.
It is.
But Newcastle need to be back in the top flight. We need to have a team in the Midlands. I'm pleased London are
coming back into the top flight.
We used to have Sheffield. My beloved Bradford. I know it's an issue, folks, with Odsal. I know it's a massive issue, but if they could get the stadium right, working with government, there's a whole new world out there, and from a broadcast point of view and from an advertising point of view, if you want to grow the game and bring more money into the game so that you can invest in junior pathways, the women's program, academy teams, that money isn't coming from cigarettes and beer anymore.
No.
That was the old days. It's going to come from broadcast revenue.
Yeah.
But you can't do it if you're going to have a geographic competition confined to Cheshire, Lancashire and Yorkshire.
No.
That's just not going to happen.
No.
That's right.
No, and it's a sad thing that we've not expanded since 1996. Really.
Well, we've contracted. We've contracted.
Yeah.
I don't want to be negative coming on the podcast, but it's something that the British game needs to look in the mirror and say, where do we want to be? I'm not saying the Aussies and the Antipodeans have got it right, Jake, because I go to Volandis. He's been there for a while. He hasn't said the right things from my point of view about expansion in terms of Perth and Adelaide.
I was going to say, what are the right things?
Well, I think the right things are to go back into Perth. And my view is I think that Arthurson and Quayle got it right back in the mid-90s with 20 teams. I really do. And I believe the talent's there.
Yeah.
Most of the new NRL players, I've been to Fiji. I've seen football there. My cousin Neville captained Papua New Guinea. We all know about Samoa and Tonga. There's raw talent. Auckland's a big place, biggest Polynesian city on planet Earth.
Of course.
And so the fish aren't going to be fishing, or the fish aren't going to be swimming where they used to be swimming in places like Wagga Wagga or Mount Isa.
No.
So in my view, there is the player pool out there, the potential player pool. I think we need to go back to 20. I'd like to see Perth back in the competition. I'd probably like to see a team from South Australia, from Adelaide. And
a second one from New Zealand?
For sure and for certain. I spent 10 years, for goodness sake, Martin, in New Zealand. 10 years.
Well, there's a brand new stadium being built in Christchurch, isn't there, at the moment? 26,000 capacity.
Well, whether the team is going to be in the South Island or in the capital, I'm seeking probably more advice myself as to where that should be. But New Zealand needs a second team.
Yeah.
I love the up the Wars concept, because no matter which team you supported, but up the Wars become part of the rugby league vernacular. I think you had everyone from the Prime Minister to Billy the Battler saying...
We were talking about Peter Deakin earlier, and that's just the sort of thing he would have done. He would have just come up with that, wouldn't he?
He would have. That had Peter Deakin's DNA written all over it. But coming back to your question, I think a second team in New Zealand, definitely... I'm not convinced about the Papua New Guinea experiment.
No, I'm not. No.
That's got more to do with...
Maybe in the long term, perhaps.
Well, that's got more to do with foreign affairs and countering the influence of China.
Which isn't the NRL's responsibility.
Well, it's not their core business, is it? No. So what's next for the NRL? Buying a patrol boat?
Yeah, well, quite, yeah.
But I would say Perth, a second team in New Zealand, and I would go to Adelaide. I think that's the safe option. I think they are the safe options. But we need to be doing more with our brothers, like Papua New Guinea. For goodness sake, it's lip service. I think it's great that the Prime Minister's 13 go up to PNG. But I've said this for years, Martin, Jake, why don't we play a test match every year between Australia and Papua New Guinea, our nearest neighbour, where it's the national sport? Call it the Kokoda Cup, in memory of what happened on the Owen Stanleys during World War II, the descendants of the Fuzzy Wuzzy Angels. and alternate the test match between Port Moresby and Townsville every year.
Well, one thing I'd like to see, Costo, is NRL matches, first-grade matches, being taken on the road. So clubs. I mean, clubs often do take games on the road, don't they, into country areas?
Yeah, to make money.
To make money.
Yeah,
but I can't see why there shouldn't be at least one NRL game every year in Port Moresby.
I'm with you.
Or one every year in places like
Suva,
perhaps.
Oh, for sure.
Christchurch,
well,
Dunedin,
Christchurch,
all those sort of places.
Well, we've had games in Christchurch, and I'm sure Dunedin. I've called rugby league either the Kiwis or the Warriors. I'm pretty sure
all over New Zealand.
Well, I think in 8 venues across the country. But coming back to places that I suppose are the next frontier, if I could use that expression, Port Moresby. I think the Australian government, or DFAT, the Department of Foreign Affairs, Valandis and Co, should be working with DFAT to say, you know what, we're going to take a game. I think the Vegas thing is fantastic. It's a long time coming.
You think that'll work well?
Well, I think it will work well, and I've been wondering, and a lot of other people, because it wasn't yesterday that we took State of Origin to California.
We did.
People
Long
are going
Beach.
to say, did he really say that? And I say to the younger audience, yes, we did. We did take it to California.
Yeah.
But the follow-up and the follow-up investment...
The follow-up was zero.
Well, the follow-up was in the negatives. It was just, again, it just disappeared. But I think that playing NRL matches, a game in Port Moresby or a game in, say, Suva, they're ready. They're ready for that. But at the moment, we can't even show respect to Papua New Guinea by playing an annual test match against them. And there's a lot of people who are wondering where our game is going in terms of strategic plan. Not only in Australia,
it's good to see the Pacific Test though at the end of this season.
Well, it is, and we should
PNG hosting that,
and we should
those
be
games.
doing that. And next year, and Fiji, for example, will be hosting the equivalent. And I think even people today in Fiji, they know that the Barty, because you know what, fellas, I'm pretty sure I'm right in saying this. The Barty, they have not played a Test match on Fijian soil for over 2 decades.
No.
How is that growing the game in Fiji?
Precisely.
That's right.
Yeah.
And obviously, with how successful Fiji rugby sevens and rugby is over there, it's got to be an area we need to try and get into. That's for sure. A few talking points just from over the weekend that I read online. Old Trafford. There's a lot of fans saying that it's time to move on from Old Trafford.
And why?
Short in goals. And they're saying that basically it's taking the attacking kick out of the grand finals. What are your thoughts on this one,
Well, you've just got to be a bit smarter, haven't you?
Yeah.
If you short in goals, I admit that the short in goals, are not ideal, and particularly with the fall away, we saw Tom Johnson very nearly get badly injured, didn't we?
No one wants to see that. Can we state the obvious? No one wants to see that players injured, and player welfare should be top priority. In fact, priority number 1, 2, and 3.
Of course it should, yeah.
But I love the romance of going to Old Trafford.
So do I.
And as I said, not my first visit to the old girl, if you like. And surely they can do something to try and mitigate the risk. I don't want to sound like a solicitor or a KC.
I think so.
But yeah, I would be disappointed to see the game's showpiece event domestically. I'm not being disrespectful to the Challenge Cup. I love the tradition now that we've come to of the Cup being played at Wembley and the Super League Grand Final.
So do I. And
at Old Trafford.
Don't change those two things. You don't change what works.
I suspect you and your publications would run a campaign.
Yeah, well, we
to
probably
block
would.
That is that fair call?
But we probably would. But it is a fair call to say that Old Trafford is showing its age a bit, isn't it?
It is.
I mean, lack of big screens around the ground, for example.
Yes.
Some of the press box is pretty primitive compared to.
Wembley.
Compared to Wembley or compared to Tottenham even. I think you were at Tottenham at the weekend, weren't you, on Sunday?
Went down
to watch an NFL game.
Yeah, Baltimore Ravens versus the Tennessee Titans.
And the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium, I think you would say, was probably a far more modern and better stadium than Old Trafford.
Yeah, absolutely. And such a great viewing experience. We were quite high up. We're probably 5 or 6 rows from the top. And still a great viewing experience. 61,000 showed up for the game. And, that's an example of a league from another country trying to expand into new markets.
That knows how to market itself. That's the point.
We're very good at it, see, and that's. I often look. I think we've got the great game, the greatest game, hence the greatest game of all moniker. But do we have the greatest custodians of the game
We
steering
don't.
the game in the right direction? I'm not. Well, Martin, you've just said it.
Yeah,
So-
we don't. We don't. Nobody in rugby league has ever known how to sell the game, apart from the guy we've just been talking about earlier, Peter Deakin.
We should encourage our audience. Google the name Peter Deakin,
Yeah,
Deakin for the younger people.
It's worth doing.
Absolute genius.
Yeah.
And I'm sure he and Morris Lindsay are swapping notes upstairs as we speak.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, London Broncos
Oh.
into the Super League next year. How do they succeed? How do they make it a successful campaign? And how do they stay in the league?
Well, to start with, they've got to keep hold of Mike Eccles, the coach, and Rhys Lovegrove, actually, because when their form, they were 11th in the championship on the 7th of May. They
Isn't
were
that amazing?
looking like being potentially relegated. But Keithley then sacked Rhys Lovegrove as their coach, and Mike Eccles moved fairly quickly to sign him up as his assistant coach at London. And I mean, I'm not saying this is all down to Rhys Lovegrove, but I mean, it was you've got to judge things by their outcomes, and they just started playing well. And so keep that coaching team in place to start with. And then they've got to spend up to the salary cap, and David Hughes, who's probably invested
How much, Martin?
30 million quid over the
Only
years.
30 million quid.
Or maybe a bit more, but
How happy do you think he must be?
yeah, well,
Hey? Is he the happiest man in British rugby league right now?
Yeah, but to but to remain in Super League next year, they've got to have they've got to start signing some players who are going to make it work for them. They've already got one or two, but probably their squad does need to grow quite significally.
This is very difficult, and for Antipodeans, Martin, the whole concept
It's
saying
ridiculous,
you're
isn't
going
it?
to
Play at a different
well,
level.
if you're a player and you're going to go to the other side of the world and sign, well, we'd be looking for say a 2 or 3 year contract, but there's no guarantee that you're going to play 2 or 3 years in Super League.
No.
This is the whole problem, and trying to attract staff.
This is why I just don't believe in promotion and relegation.
Well, I've never believed in it. And not every club can grow up to be a Super League club. I'm sorry to tell that to people in different towns, and great towns with great history, going back to the embryonic stages of our game, back to 1895, including those who formed the Northern Union.
Yeah.
You know who you are. But the same goes down under. Not every club... Not at your hometown. Your hometown, you know this, will never be in the NRL.
Absolutely.
But you accept that, don't you?
Yep, that's right.
That's just the way it goes.
Yeah.
And if you want to grow the game and for our game to realise its full potential, we need a strong game, and having a national presence in our first world economy. So, our professional clubs, let's face it, we've got, 11 clubs in England, 1 in France, 1 in New Zealand, 16 in Australia. In terms of fully professional.
Yeah.
That's it. That's
yeah.
it.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah. But of course, what London have to do, every other club that knew a long time ago it's going to be in Super League next year, in other words, the clubs that have not been relegated, they've already put their squads together. London start on the back foot, months behind all the rest.
And consequently...
Trying to put a squad together.
Martin,
and they've got to sign the leftovers.
If I'm running Super League, if I could give respectfully advice to those running the game in the UK, London should be quarantined from relegation.
For at least 3 years.
Well,
or even longer.
Well, we've got to get to the stage where that is dispensed with.
Yeah.
That we go back to a license-based system, a la the NRL, and so you can have certainty. So people like Hughes and others, if you want people, not everyone's going to be like him, are they?
No.
To have the long pockets and go boom, boom, boom. And so if we want new people, imagine that, new people investing in our game or wanting to put a team into, say, the Midlands or back into Newcastle or Cardiff, if you want to attract that investment, it's not going into West Africa. If you think there's going to be a coup d'etat, are you going to set up a mine there?
No, and the remarkable thing is, for example, that Seymour Curdy, who was the multimillionaire who was behind Newcastle, he's pulled out now because they've been relegated to the third tier.
No surprise.
To League One.
No surprise.
If that hadn't happened, I don't think he would have done that. And if they'd got promoted to Super League, of course, he wouldn't have done that. But it's really damaging.
Yes, it is.
It really
is.
is.
And I think the conversation, we need to have a mature conversation about this, because money doesn't grow on trees. It just doesn't fall from the skies. And I feel for London because they are. Let's state the obvious. Right now, here we are, mid-October. They're on a hiding to nothing to bolster their stocks to avoid being pushed down in less than 12 months from now. And I think that's grossly unfair. The system is fundamentally flawed. I'm so pleased they're back. We can't let them disappear.
No, I couldn't agree more.
Yeah, absolutely. Any other rugby league topics you want to touch on before we wrap this up, gents? Is there anything else circulating we should...
I'm sure there probably are, but we've been going at it for quite a while, haven't we? So
that's right.
Maybe we ought to...
We've had a fair chop.
We've had a fair chop, you know. Costo could talk all day, I'm pretty sure.
I've got one more question, though, for Costo. Who's your favourite game caller of all time and why?
Yeah, it's pretty obvious. You know, I mean, when I was in the Riverina, I actually came across, that's in southern New South Wales for our European audience. Used to read the 6 o'clock news there for the 7 Network affiliate back in the late 90s after I came back from the UK. And years later, I bumped into an elderly couple on the train travelling between Melbourne and Sydney. And I got talking to them. And they got on at Cootamundra, which is the birthplace of the iconic cricketer Sir Donald Bradman. And I said to them, pleased to meet you, blah, blah, blah. And where did you grow up, or where did you used to be? We used to be in Junee, which is Laurie Daly's hometown. And they remembered they used to have a neighbour and a little boy over the fence. They could hear him playing in the backyard, and the little boy would play marbles, and he used to call them marbles. Now, I'm not sure how. I've never called marbles. I tried to call greyhound racing, and it was an absolute disgrace. I'm embarrassed to even admit that, right? And I've never called horse racing, so I'm not going to Aintree in any time soon, I can tell you that. But the little boy was playing marbles, and then years later he used to, as I understand, look in the windows of the shops and look at the TV, which was a new thing, and I think seeing horses running around, and he'd pretend to call the races. And, of course, his name's Ray Warren. And he was at the peak of his powers, head and shoulders above everybody as far as I'm concerned. And he had just a beautiful way to call the game and was the voice of rugby league and made a huge contribution to our game. And he was someone who obviously I always...
Retired not very long ago.
Yeah, not too long ago. So to Rabbits, always held him in the highest esteem.
It's not the same without him, is it?
Well, everyone comes to the end at some point, and no matter what their calling is in life, their vocation. Yeah. But at the peak of his powers, tremendous. You mean I spent 10 years with Sky New Zealand. Before me was a bloke called Graham Hughes. And again, I thought the world of Graham Hughes. Unbelievable caller. Fantastic there from the get-go when the Warriors came into the Winfield Cup. So there's an art to calling. Not everyone can do it. A lot of people think they can do it, but I've grown up doing it. I'm not saying I'm the best, but it's also who you work with and the chemistry in the box to make good television, to make people feel, gee, I was so glad I watched that. I enjoyed it, the experience, because at the end of the day, we're in the entertainment business.
Can I just ask you one question? We're going to have, from next season, all 6 Super League games shown on TV, on Sky, which is going to be, from the normal 2 that we've had this year. I assume, therefore, Costo, that they're going to need some new commentators. Would you be interested in coming over and taking part in that?
Well, the short answer is yes. I'm not under contract with anybody right now, and I've only come back into the game, calling the game in the last couple of years, calling a couple of NRL matches for SEN in Australia and some International Rugby League. I've got an announcement coming up very soon in relation to more international flavour to my work. In fact, a couple of years ago, I had the privilege of calling Russia and Ukraine and Serbia. I called a game. I think the last time Russia played Ukraine in team sport, it was rugby league, and they had an Antipodean broadcasting it. So
didn't Ukraine get 90-odd points in that game?
I'm not sure if it was 90-odd points, but...
they won easily, didn't they?
Alexander Skorbach. Remember the name, Skorbach. He is the king of Ukrainian rugby league. I keep in touch with him, by the way. In fact, I called him a couple of months ago playing for the Lviv Tigers, in the Ukrainian nines. And no, I was not in Ukraine, but calling it remotely. But I am on have a journey coming up. I'll announce that in due course. But look, the short answer is I'd love to be back in Britain. I love the game. At the moment, I'm a free agent and happy to chat.
Okay.
Yeah, perfect. Well, we might wrap it up here. Where can people follow you on social media, Twitter, mate?
Oh, the easiest is Twitter at Costo Jason, and have a look there and enjoy your rugby league. And of course, look, thanks fellas for the opportunity to come in today. It's been good fun.
It's been good fun indeed. Yeah,
absolutely.
Thank you very much, Jason.
Sit here and talk for hours on end, I'm
We
sure.
could.
Before we say goodbye to our viewers and listeners, don't forget, if you do want to grab yourself a subscription to the League Express weekly newspaper, you can get that at www.totalrl.com/shop. We've got the monthly Rugby League World magazines on there as well, so grab yourself a subscription to that. But yeah, we might wrap it up here, gents. Thanks again, Costo. Really appreciate your time, mate. And yeah, this should be up later tonight, so stay tuned for that one.
Thank you.
Cheers, guys.
Cheers.